share some laughs, I am absolutely down. Like, please invite me to your next social function. I promise I will make it worth your while. And I've pretty much always been this way, so I thought it would be kind of fun to go down memory lane and look back at some of my finest celebratory moments. So I don't know if we can get those on the screen at all. You got it, Arnold. Let's give it up for our team, you guys. There it is. And it magically appeared. Who's that little cutie up there? So yeah, we're going to talk about these. We're going to talk about why my parents thought it would be cool to get me a tooth cake for my birthday. That's fine and great. 5 was a great year. I got to wear a very cool crown. I've never been excited as I was in that photo to cut a cake. And we also love Christmas. I think there should be one more up there. Valentine's Day is also another very popular one. Recreated that. And yeah, so all that to say, I love a good party. I love to celebrate. And celebration is something that we value a lot at the project. I had my last birthday party at Brett and Natalie's house. Brett was just leading worship. And Ruben, both pastors here, they also came to that. And so I know some of you would definitely not invite your boss to your birthday party, but we are just not the same. And with big milestones, we take time to just thank God for what he's done through this community. And with that, if we hit a little milestone, we'll do something fun. And so back in the fall, we had over 500 young adults at our Connecting Point night, which was one of the largest nights since COVID. And so our boss's definition of a celebration was taking us to Smitty's for breakfast. Some of you may consider that workplace harassment, but to each their own. That's fine. I didn't have to pay for it, so it's okay. But, even tonight, you have your little party blowers as we honor 4 young adults that are going to get baptized tonight. So celebration, it really matters a lot to us. But why? Is it for the sake of just doing something funny or like Instagram worthy or to just be a trendy church? And I think that those are some pretty fair questions. Culturally, I feel like there's 2 ends of the spectrum when it comes to the practice of celebration. First off, there's this maybe more legalistic end where the word fun was a curse word, maybe in the church that you grew up in. Maybe you lived in a context where church felt really rigid and strict, where you didn't feel like you could breathe or let loose. And the last thing you would expect are noisemakers or food trucks or throwing axes or mechanical bulls or like any of the crazy things that we tend to do here around the project. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have like all party but no genuine praise, where a gathering of believers is reduced to a spectacle or a social gathering, and the Holy Spirit just isn't in it. And this is a tension I wrestle with a lot as a ministry leader. I believe it's so important to show reverence and honor to God in a way that is worthy of who he is. My dad grew up Catholic, and so when we'd visit his side of the family, we'd go to Mass. And while I thought that was pretty boring in comparison to any other church, as I've grown up, I've really come to appreciate those more traditional practices. I appreciate how they take the emphasis off of me and really point my focus onto how great God is. Things like reading passages of the Bible together, singing hymns that were written in older English, and even dressing up a little bit for church, all of those different things. But what I love about the culture of the more modern church, something like the Project, I really love that as well, this idea that you can come as you are and through that step just experience God's transformational work in your life. That if it's your first time coming to church, you don't have to worry about what you're wearing, or if you don't know the words to a song or whatever it is, you can just be honest and open and real before God. However, the danger I wrestle with is when these spaces become a little too casual, where we just see Jesus as our homeboy and not someone who is holy and needs to be honored and respected, someone who is all-powerful. Where attending church is about who we get to see or whether or not our favorite song was played or whether or not the pastor caters to what we want to hear. And so I think a lot of you as well, these are conversations that I have quite often at the Project. As we kind of figure out where we stand in this divide, I think it's really important to just zoom out and see what the Bible has to say about the practice of celebration. And we're in this series called Rhythms, where we've been going through different spiritual disciplines, these different practices that we can do that really help us to just draw closer to God. And so here at the project, we believe that the Bible is God's true and lasting word. It was written over thousands of years ago by different authors, and its principles and instructions and stories, they continue to guide us today. And if you don't have a Bible and you'd like one, we would absolutely love to gift you with one. So make sure you go to our Connect booth after the service, and we'll give you one. And so I'm certainly grateful that God has given us this book to serve as an instruction manual for life, that, when different areas of concern come up in my life, when I have different questions about things, I can turn to it for guidance. And that's exactly what I want to do here, because I think that if we can develop our biblical understanding of what celebration is, it will help us navigate some of these questions we have, and it will also give us an outline on how we can incorporate this discipline of celebration in our lives really practically. Now, throughout the Bible, we can see celebration was a pretty regular part of life. As early as the first book in Genesis, we see God taking time to declare each category of creation as good. And on the seventh day, after he had created everything, he rests and he blesses that day. He sets it apart from the rest of them. And there's definitely an element of celebration in that. And throughout the Old Testament, there are 7 major feasts that are observed in ancient Israel. Now, I'm like a huge Bible nerd, so you're just going to have to buckle up for a little bit as I describe these to you. So the first one is the Passover, and that commemorated Israel's escape from slavery in Egypt. And then there's the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and that's a continuation of the Passover and a memorial for the haste in which the Israelites had to leave Egypt. They really had to get out of there. The Feast of First Fruits, and so this was intended to be a time of thanksgiving where the Israelites would bring the first fruits of their harvest and offer it up to God as a sign of thanksgiving for his provision in and through their lives. The next one is the Festival of Weeks, or Pentecost. This was celebrated 7 weeks after the Passover, and it served as a time to remember the greatness of God when he gave the 10 Commandments to Moses. And Pentecost also means 50, and so the law was given to Moses 50 days after they had left Egypt. The next one is the Festival of Trumpets, and that sounds really fun because you guessed it, they just play some trumpets. I think that sounds pretty cool. And so really this was just an expression of the anticipation that the Israelites had, knowing that one day God the Father would show himself again, and that would be eventually through his son, Jesus. The next one is the Great Day of Atonement, and this was the most important holy day where the most holy sacrifice was made by the high priest for the sins and mistakes of the whole nation. And the last one is the Feast of Tabernacles, where the Israelite people would live in these temporary tents made from branches and trees to remember the wilderness experiences that they endured as they left Egypt. And it served as a reminder of God's provision and protection over them. And again, I give you that snapshot because I think it's kind of cool, but to just point out a couple things. That firstly, feasting and celebrating were a regular part of Jewish life. God intentionally commanded them to observe these days, which included times where, they wouldn't be working. They would be resting and simply just celebrating in community. It wasn't about thriving. It wasn't about getting things done. It was just about being with people you love and just thinking about what God has done. And secondly, I think it's really cool to see this overarching narrative that is woven into these festivals. Within that, each of them, they draw the people back to what God had done for them. It's like the celebration with intentionality. So as we look to the New Testament of the Bible, the first 4 Gospels give us an account of Jesus' life and ministry here on earth. And so in John 2, we read about the first miracle that Jesus performed. And I think this is really interesting. I would at least assume your first miracle, I don't know, maybe heal somebody, raise somebody from the dead. But funny enough, it was actually changing water into wine at a wedding. Very bold choice, in my opinion, especially as someone who grew up in a church tradition where alcohol consumption was generally frowned upon. But nonetheless, let's read this story in John 2. So on the 3rd day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw out some and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink, but you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and the disciples believed him. Now, I've been to a few weddings. Most recently, my best friend got married this past week. She got married on a Thursday. I don't know who gets married on a Thursday. I did have to take a couple personal days, but it's fine. And as some of you know, maybe personally or by helping friends or family plan their own weddings, they are two things. Well, three. They're great and lovely and awesome, but they're expensive and they are stressful. Like I said, I know, I like to party it up. I really do. My world is with my girls living on the dance floor. Invite me to your wedding. I don't even need a plate. Just let me dance and I will be happy. But there's just something about the money that we are expected to spend on just one day that really gets to me. In Canada, the average cost of a wedding is between $22,000 and $30,000, and that hurts me. That hurts me to say out loud. Literal pain is in my body right now. That's a car, or a down payment, or several trips, or a lot of junior chickens, for being real. There's this show on Netflix called Marriage or Mortgage, where a wedding planner and a realtor compete for the business of different couples and convince them to either have their dream wedding or their dream house. Has anyone watched it before? You shouldn't have to watch it because the answer should be house every single time. I don't get it. Have the ideal single-family home that you could invest in and grow a future with, or this ice sculpture that people can stare at your reception. I'd like to think that the answer speaks for itself. But regardless, Jesus' choice to perform this sign showed that he cared for people just beyond the practical things in life. He also cared about the big milestones. Some biblical scholars see this as the first of many stories that point to the idea that Jesus was often surrounded by people who were having fun, who were joyful, who were having a good time. In ancient Jewish culture, just like it is today, weddings were considered a huge deal, the party of all parties. And so even the fact that he was invited, that said something about the kind of person that he was, someone who loved people, who blessed a biblical union. So obviously he cares about our most immediate needs, but he also cares about these joyous festivities in our lives as well. And he went just beyond attending the wedding, but he also served the people and provided for them within the context of the celebration. And even the fact that the wine was regarded as a choice wine is huge. Normally at these functions, it said in the passage, they would serve the good wine first and then use the cheaper stuff as people drank more. And so he goes above and beyond the standard of tradition. And the master of the banquet was yo, this is some good stuff. And he likely didn't even know where it came from. He was just good wine's good wine. Don't use that out of context. Anyways, so weddings are expensive. They can also be very stressful. And I'm really thankful that the wedding that my friend's wedding, it pretty much went off without a hitch, except for one kind of major-ish thing. They got this barbecue catering company to do the wedding, which I was stoked for because brisket is great. I was very excited for it. I recently went to Texas, and my love for meat has grown exponentially. But there was just one problem. The caterers got lost finding the venue, which in turn made them late. And they served the food out of this food truck, so you had to go up and they would dish your food. And instead of having 5 servers like they had promised, they had 2 for 160 people. So the ceremony ended up being an hour behind because of how long it took to get everyone fed. And so what I'll say is that I was very happy to be a part of the bridal party for this one so that I could eat first. I tend to get very hangry at weddings. And hear me out on this, especially if there's some type of stupid game that you have to play to get your food. I drove all the way here, I got you a gift, and I don't get to eat because I don't know the groom's favorite color. I don't know the name of the bride's first pet. Okay, not great, so little tip for you there. And so, yeah, not ideal, not great. They start running out of food, and towards the end, it wasn't ideal. There were these little buns at our table, and if anything, I was like, well, maybe God could do a little bread into brisket type miracle, but that did not happen. And so, all that to say, if you want to keep the party going at your wedding, that means making sure your guests are well taken care of and that they have full plates and full cups. Running out of brisket and mac and cheese, not great. Sad, but eventually people got over it. Running out of wine at a Jewish wedding, that was a major social mistake that would bring great dishonor to the couple. So by performing this miracle, Jesus prevented them from being embarrassed and allowed for the festivities to continue without disruption. So obviously there's some deep symbolism within this miracle as well. We see Jesus take something ordinary and turn it into something extraordinary. Later on in the Last Supper, before Jesus dies, he uses wine as a symbol for his own blood that would be the payment for humanity's sins. It implies his spirit of joy and generosity. And I also think it challenges the idea of God that some of us may have. That maybe you see God as this distant being who doesn't really care about you unless you're asking for something really, really nicely, or unless you screw up because you think he's out to get you. But other than that, he's pretty distant. We see a completely different picture here, that Jesus desires to be in every moment of our lives, actively with us. He's involved in every facet of our lives. When we invite him in, he will provide for us in his ways and in his timing. In the big things in life, in the small things, and also in the fun things. Now, I think it's also important to make a distinction between what celebration is and isn't. We see this as something that's practiced and commanded throughout the Bible. Celebrations were done in community, and ultimately they point back to God. And it could be celebrating something you'd done, like freeing the Israelites from slavery or joining people in marriage. And we carry these traditions through now, currently. We celebrate Jesus' birth at Christmas time. We celebrate his death and resurrection at Easter. At the end of the day, it always points back to him. One author described celebration as giving exuberant thanks for what God has done. And that really opens the door for celebration to be cheerful and playful and maybe even a little childlike at times. And so we still have some more disciplines to go through in this series, but celebration is really the backbone of all of them. It gives us the ability to live in all the other disciplines. When we are consistently pursuing things like prayer and silence and solitude and worship and service and study, we are shifting our focus away from ourselves, our schedules, our problems, all the things around us, the stress, the worry, whatever it is, and we are centering ourselves on God. We are making space for his peace to take hold of our lives. And the natural response to that is celebration. Now, what I don't want you to take away from this message is that you should get plastered at weddings. That is definitely not the takeaway here, because Jesus turned water into wine. And there's actually multiple verses throughout the Bible that kind of warn against this opposite idea of celebration, specifically when it talks about wine and getting drunk. In Proverbs 20, verse 1, it says, "Wine is a mocker and beer a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them is not wise." And in the book of Isaiah, God lays some pretty strong warnings to the Israelite people. He says this, "Woe to those who rise early in the morning to run after their drinks, who stay up late at night until they are inflamed." And so in these scenarios, one celebration is focused on a substance, or maybe perhaps the feelings that substance elicit. Maybe it's to numb pain you're feeling, or to maintain a social status, whatever it is at the end of the day. Looking for freedom in anything other than Christ will not satisfy you. You're opening up the door to addiction and shame and for sin ultimately to enter into your life. And it's not just alcohol that can lead us down the wrong kind of celebrating. Literally, you can insert any type of vice or crutch that you want. But all in all, when your celebration is separate from God and is self-gratifying, it is not true and fulfilling celebration. So celebration is linked closely with joy, which is a fruit of the Spirit. And basically that means that, if you have God's Spirit living inside of you, there are these different character traits that will just kind of be an outflow because his Spirit is inside of you. And so joy is one of those. And biblical joy can kind of be divided into these three different categories. And the first is a feeling. We can feel joy and happiness and those terms are used interchangeably throughout the Bible when something good happens in our lives. The second is that it's a condition. As we grow in our relationship with Jesus, that's a trait that continues to develop within us, where you just carry joy around because you're a person of joy, because that's who God is. He's a God of joy. And the third is a discipline. And this is when we have to make the conscious choice, put in the effort to be joyful, even when we may not want to, even when we're in the middle of a storm. And at that point, it may just be a mere act of obedience. And that's where that discipline of celebration comes in. There may be times in life where it's very easy to celebrate. When you get the job, or the degree, or the guy, or the girl, or the healing, or the house, or whatever else you may have been praying for. But sometimes things don't go the way that we hoped, and we go through loss, or heartache, or pain. And what I'm thankful for is that, it's not like you have to put on a birthday hat and cry when your life sucks. I mean, you can if you want. But as much as celebration is a discipline, so is lamenting. And that's when we express our grief and our sorrow in a raw and unfiltered way to God. And so both of those things are important and they're necessary and they can actually coexist at the same time. And we can kind of see that juxtaposition in Ecclesiastes in chapter 3, verses 1 to 8. It says this: "There's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace." And so there may very well be times in your life where things are peachy and things are great, and other times where you were just in your darkest night. And I think of, Jesus' story, how on Palm Sunday he was riding on a donkey into Jerusalem, and all these people were so happy for this triumphal entry. But then just a few days later, he's sitting in a garden in agony, praying to the point of sweating blood because as he awaited to be killed. He went from his highest high to his lowest lows. But even in that state of pain, he was surrendered to the Father's will for him. And because of that, we do have a reason to celebrate. We may have all of our different baggages, our hang-ups, the things that we are carrying around, but even just the fact that you are alive right now, that you're in this very room, is not a mistake. It's not a coincidence. It's actually very much a cause for celebration. And so as we reflect on what the Bible has to say about celebration, there's 3 quick things that I think you can do to incorporate this practice into your own life. And so the first is to celebrate with intention. And that includes, picking a time and a place where you can incorporate it into your personal rhythm. Maybe you could take some time to learn more about those Judaic festivals and figure out a way to commemorate them and to celebrate them. Maybe it's taking a weekly day of rest, just as as God exemplified in the beginning in Genesis. Literally, you could do anything. It could be a party. I think that'd be kind of fun. But it could just even be taking time to reflect, as long as it is just drawing you near to Christ. And then I think what's key here is also to invite God and to keep him at the center. And obviously there's things in our lives like graduations and birthdays and weddings and all of those things. And we can also use those celebrations that maybe are more focused on us and these milestones that we're reaching. And we can reflect and see how far God has brought us through those things. And so within that, it's important to steer away from self-gratification and things that pull you away from him. And then the second is to celebrate even when it's hard. That one's a lot easier said than done, but I truly believe that if you make that choice, if you strengthen yourself in that discipline, that it will change your heart posture. I think of Colossians 3:1 where it says, "Set your eyes on things above, not on earthly things." Reminding ourselves that the pain that we are going through in this life is not forever. And that, this life is only temporary, that one day we actually will be constantly celebrating with God together in heaven. And the third is to celebrate with gratitude. And so maybe you find yourself in a place and you're like, I don't really have anything to celebrate right now. Maybe it just needs to start with that, being thankful. You might start to realize the things that you take for granted are actually an incredible result of God's provision in your life. The sun is out. Your lungs are working. You have the means to be at church today. You have access to clean drinking water. You have access to ice cream pretty much whenever you want. Oilers are going to Game 7. That's crazy. Who would have thought? There it is. There it is. I knew you all love celebrating. You're just like a little quiet tonight, but that's okay. So, shh, I'm doing something. So you may not be in control of the things that, you don't have, but you can be thankful for what you do have. And you can trust that God will continue to provide for all of your needs. And I think one thing that's really cool is to kind of celebrate the things that God has been doing at the project. As of later today, we will have celebrated the baptisms of 26 people this year alone, which is incredible. I think we can clap for that one. There it is. I almost thought this place was empty. We opened up the balcony a couple months ago because it was getting a little too crowded up here. I see you guys, all 12 of you. I try to look up there every once in a while. And that was honestly a huge milestone, being like, oh man, it's really hard to find a seat. What an excellent problem to have. It's crowded, and heaven's going to be crowded too. This is amazing. We've, seen record attendance. Over 600 young adults attended our a couple of nights, actually. Our rendezvous night, a baptism night back in April. And these are numbers that we haven't seen since COVID, and so it's just so exciting. And I don't say that to be like, there's this many people. I promise I don't, because that's over 600 stories. That's over 600 people that God is moving in the lives of, and that's really what we're excited for. We're giving away Bibles every week. We're seeing people getting saved. And it's truly the best. And it's important to take that time to just reflect on how far God has brought us. And so before we dive into more worship and baptisms, I just want to close with one of my favorite celebration stories. And it's the story of the prodigal son. And so I'm going to read it to you. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am, starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, and he was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." And at the end of the day, this is really the most important thing that we get to celebrate. Jesus used this story to illustrate each of our stories. Each of us has strayed away from God through the sinful choices that we've made. And maybe we personally haven't ended up with a bunch of pigs, but I know I've definitely found myself at some rock bottom moments where I'm like, how on earth did I end up here? And to me, it's just so beautiful that despite the ways that, the son grieved his father, that he brought him so much agony, when he came back, he wasn't met with hostility or anger. But the father actually took the initiative to run to him while he was still a long way off. And what was the father's response? It was celebration. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now is found. So we're going to transition into a time of worship right now. We're going to sing a song called Gratitude. I'm sure you've probably heard it before. And yeah, maybe you're just in a point right now where there's not a lot to celebrate. Things aren't going great. I just want to encourage you to just open your heart to what God might want to say to you tonight. Take that time to reflect, because I promise you there are things that are so worth celebrating. And maybe life's great, and maybe you just got to be like, honestly, God, you're the best, thanks, and everything is peachy, and praise God for that. So why don't we stand? I'll pray for us as we continue. God, we thank you for who you are, that you love us, that you are not this distant, far off God, that you see each of us, that you know each of us, that you delight in each of us. I thank you for the beauty of celebration, that while things may not always be great, because of you, because of your sacrifice, we have hope and we can have joy and we can celebrate. And so as we transition into this time of worship, God, I just pray that you would open our hearts to what you may want to say to us, that you would just remind us of the ways that you've been so faithful in our lives, Lord, that we would just take that time to thank you for what you have done and for what you will continue to do. And yeah, for those of us who are just really going through it right now, God, I pray that we wouldn't lose hope. For those of us that maybe do feel far off, would we know that you run to us, that you meet us where we are, that we don't have to have it all together. You come to us, you call us a son, you call us a daughter, and you delight to be with us. So thank you for what you're doing here at the project. Thank you for all of these incredible young adults, Lord. And would you just speak to us tonight? So let's continue in worship together.